Before,
You say what Simon's gonna do.
okay, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll miss a few folks. I'm sure they'll join us as we wander in, but we'll start with Luke. Are you giving the?
Yeah, all right. Hi, everybody. My name is Luke Mortensen, planner. I'll be helping to facilitate this afternoon meeting. I will work alongside Chair Finkeldei as we go forward. So a few items for you kind of regarding meeting operations. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. For folks online, please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you are not speaking. The chat function, the public chat function is disabled, so all the chats will go to me. If you have any issues or questions, I'll do my best to assist via the chat. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This is helpful and it allows the active meeting participants to be seen on the screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting, you'll still be part of the meeting. But when you're actively participating, please turn your video back on. Like I said before, if you have any issues, you can send a chat. The city reserves the right to mute or turn off individual videos to minimize distractions during a meeting. With that, I will turn it back over to Chair Finkeldei.
Thank you, Luke, and thanks everyone for being here, and great to have Elizabeth here in person.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the great weather.
Yeah. This way you can work all the time. No getting distracted. I did want to go over something real quick. I was at a presentation, I don't know if Luke can pull this up. The Statewide Homeless Coalition met and put on a conference the last 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday here in Lawrence. And the keynote speaker was go to the next slide. Kind of his thesis was, why do some cities, we need to figure out why some cities, New York, Washington, San Francisco, Boston, he's from Seattle, why do they have a housing real problem, whereas other cities, don't necessarily have that problem? Go ahead and flip to the next slide. So he looked at, in his book, he looks at all these factors, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but he talks about weather, does studies on poverty, he does studies on all the reasons you hear, well, the benefits are so good, people come. And he does all these regressions. This one happens to be poverty. So let's say if you look at the cities there, just if you have 40% of your city under the poverty level, that has no correlation to homelessness, right? It's actually, you have a smaller chance of being homeless in a town with lots of poverty. Well, where do you end up in places that are really expensive? San Francisco, Seattle, that's where it is. Anyway, so he goes through all these different reasons, trying to find out what makes a city. And as he said, he's not a very good detective because the name of his book is Homelessness is a Housing Problem. So he kind of gives it away. But flip to the next slide. One of the big things he found, the biggest correlation between homelessness and is the homelessness in any factor is rent. The higher your rent, the more likely you are to be homeless. And another one would be lower the vacancy rate in the city, which correlates to rent. If you have vacancy rates below 5%, and certainly if they're below 3%, you have a homeless problem. So what does that mean for us in housing? If you flip to the next one, he said, well, let's compare what he calls housing supply elasticity. The theory would be if you have low vacancy rates, the markets would say they're going to build more apartments. Or if you have prices of houses going up, if your house price is going up, in theory, you would build more houses. But we all know that's not how it works because houses are hard to build. It's not like you're selling pins or something. And so housing supply elasticity depends on lots of things, but two of those he finds are how hard is it in your zoning regulations and your topography. Can you grow? Are you physically constrained? And so when you compare those, if you go to the last slide, he said, look at, here are cities and the population growth, from shrinking to growing. And you can see some cities like Seattle had a 25% growth, but they have very low housing supply elasticity. They have a homeless problem. Boston grows by 10% over that time period. They're constrained. they have a housing problem. But cities like Charlotte and Austin and San Antonio, they grew and didn't have a housing problem. Note, by the way, in Austin, this was 2019, Austin changed their zoning code, filled up a lot of open space, now they have a housing problem. And so, you know, one of his big takeaways were you need zoning codes. If you're gonna solve homelessness, you need zoning codes that help increase the supply. And that helps solve homelessness. Anyway, I think it aligns a lot with some of the work we're doing here. Not the only goal of what we're doing in the zoning code, there's like environmental and other reasons to do things, but I thought this was the presentation yesterday I saw, I thought it'd be worth sharing. So just throw that out there and now I'll turn it over to Elizabeth to walk us through our agenda. I will say we have some things with Elizabeth and then we have Phil and Michael who are going to take a few items up.
And we have some company today.
Yes, thank you.
Kind of a house party. It's the rain.
You want me, which one do you want?
The steering committee. No. All right, let's do that one. Yeah. Okay, everyone. So actually kept the PowerPoint pretty short. I know you're all going to be sad about that. But I think we have a lot of things to discuss today. So we'll let everyone in.
There we
Do
go.
all the
Okay, sorry about that.
things. It's totally fine. Let's go to the next slide. So let's do our usual talking about the schedule and where we are. Commissioner Finkeldine, when do you want to take a stop on this and turn it over to Phil and Michael?
Well, we would have plenty of time for that, but I guess I have a hard deadline. But we certainly want to give them plenty of time. Phil has a lot to say.
So you want to do it before we get into the meeting?
No, I think let's get through the main topics.
Okay.
We'll see how it goes here.
Okay. Okay, so let's do just where we are. Let's go to the next slide. Thanks. Okay, we're scooting our way over to the end. So we have administration and procedures drafted and shared, and we're working on editing. We'll continue to do that for a short period of time because we're going to put the consolidated draft, the first consolidated draft up, and I'll talk about the schedule at the end, but we've done these things. So we'll finish up the teal colored things, and then hopefully we'll have the ability to celebrate some of the change and moving into some of the housing. So let's go to the next slide. So module 3, administration and procedures. So I shortened this up because while we do have changes in module 3, we don't have the level of changes that we saw in modules 1 and 2. Let's bring the people over, because I think all the next few slides are lined up like this. Awesome. Hey, come on in. Okay. So for those of you who don't normally sit in on this meeting, on the steering committee meeting, so we've gone through the updated land development code in 3 chunks. We're in the 3rd and final chunk, and we're talking about procedures today. That's the content of the steering committee discussion. I feel like some of you may have other things you want to bring up, and that's fine, we'll get there. So in terms of what has changed in the draft that you guys received, we updated the transitional provisions at the very beginning. They address how the city will deal with projects that are in progress. So if something is in the pipeline when the new code gets adopted, that tells you which code you go under, old code or new code. So there's a table in 2108, which is the general provisions. That's really the only big change in there. Across multiple sections, I'm sorry, I saw you doing your hair and I thought your hand was going up. Across multiple sections, we've recommended deleting this language, which repeats everywhere. Decision-making bodies are not required to approve the maximum density or intensity of use allowed. And there's some deviations on that. And so we can talk about this as a group. They don't have to, but we thought that having it in there potentially left an implicit message that, you know, backing away from density or intensity is preferred or acceptable. And because we're implementing the plan, Plan 2040, we really want the code and the projects to align with what's in the plan. Come on in.
Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. So we'll come back and talk about that one. We changed the regulations to allow an administrative extension. So every time I say administrative this evening, that means planning staff, it means Jeff or whoever Jeff directs it to. So this section proposes allowing one administrative extension of a project approval. So if something is going to expire because you haven't started construction, because something happened, whatever, because funding didn't come through, the administrative approval will be for up to 180 days. After that, if it was approved by city commission, it has to go back to city commission for an extension. We changed up some of the review criteria in the plan development, preliminary development plan category to consolidate and simplify some of it. We changed some of the review criteria in land development code text amendments. So that's changes to the text we're writing. I know, don't be upset. People will want to change it. It's okay. And we changed it to loosen it up a little bit. We decided it's a living document and we want the city to be able to consider text amendments. Okay, so I am not going to turn around and greet anybody, but Becky will tell me if I can do it. Thank you. And then finally, we made some changes to the review criteria for successive applications in rezoning. That is someone who wants to turn in the same application more than once. Hey, Marcy.
Can you grab mine there? Nick, can you grab mine?
Nick, can you grab that? There we go. Okay, thanks. And so what we want to do in these changes is improve clarity about the city's project expectations, right? Review criteria should tell both the reviewing body and the applicant what the project is measured against. So we want to make sure that we're clear in there. Then finally, we added an administrative adjustment process. And so as it's currently drafted, it allows changes to specific measurable criteria for an application that could come in. So let's say, because of something about the way my lot works, I really need to change my side setback by a foot. This would allow staff to make that change as long as it's within the box of what they're allowed to change. So it's not everything and anything. It's a small box, modest changes. It's intended to allow applications not to have to go to variance or a more onerous reapproval process. That section also includes just short paragraphs saying that the city has the authority to do Fair Housing Act accommodations and RLUIPA substantial burden adjustments. So those are both federal laws, and the city sometimes has to make changes based on those. So those are our big change categories. Let's go to the next slide. So what's been updated? There's a whole section 2016-03 is general review procedures. And you would have seen this in bits and pieces in the current code. Some of it in one section, some of it in different application types. And so we gathered it all up and put it in one place. And it tells an applicant or a staff member or a neighbor how the process, how the application gets processed. So do we have a pre-application meeting? Do we have a neighborhood meeting? Staff going to review it? Is staff going to write a report about it? What if someone wants to withdraw it before public hearing? What if someone wants to withdraw it in the middle of the public hearing? So we try to capture all of those rules, the major rules and the one-off rules, so we can all share expectations about what happens through that process. So there's one complete set in there. It doesn't get repeated in the individual application types, individual procedure types. So that might be a little bit different than the current code. So the impact of that is to create that full set of shared rules. We've made also some proposed changes to the plan development section, revising it for clarity. We are going to have further discussions with staff about revising the major and minor amendment processes. I think that we could clean up this section a little bit more, and we'll be working with Becky and Jeff and the team to get those improved clarity input. see the next one. What's been updated. So we've added, we've taken the existing land development code interpretation process, which is authority that the director has, and we've updated it for completeness. And so we've added new standards about staff interpretations of older planned unit developments. Sometimes there can be stuff on the books that's pretty old and doesn't have all of the information that you need. So we give rules of interpretation for planned unit developments where information is missing. Planned developments, sorry. We clarified that new uses can be interpreted into land development code, provided they meet the criteria for interpretation. That doesn't mean interpreting in a new, I was gonna say a new nuclear reactor, but that technology is changing. It means something where we have put categories in, so hazardous waste or nuclear reactor, something that's gonna have a major impact on the community, can't be interpreted in. Whoever comes up with the next frost and tan, that was my example of 15 years ago, you can get your hair frosted and tan at the same time. That can be interpreted in. Some of you may not have gone there. It's okay. Okay, Topgolf, right, would be one of those that can get interpreted in whatever the next version is, probably Formula One racing. So, so that's been specified. The site plan process, some of you may know, had 3 categories, 3 types of site plan, and we're moving it to 2. And the 2 will tell you whether or not you can do your development and not have to comply with bringing the whole thing into compliance with the code, right? So I have an existing structure somewhere, and I'm adding a, penthouse suite on the top for my new short-term rental, which is tanking, so it's a bad investment on my part. That's okay. And so if that falls into the the non-full compliance category, then staff works with you to figure out what standards you comply with and what standards you don't. If you're doing something bigger and broader, then you'll fall into the full compliance category. So I am really giving short shrift to the idea that we've actually put together here both a simplified site plan review and a path forward to help applicants understand if they're doing redevelopment, where they have to comply with the rest of the code, which is a big deal when you're looking at infill or redevelopment. So we're making that easier and we're clarifying the compliance requirements. So that's an update. Let's do the next one. Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. You can stay there. Okay, so what stayed the same? All the major processes stayed the same. And that's the reason that we're not doing a super deep dive on module 3 processes. Zoning procedures, there's a lot of law around them. There's city requirements, there's statutory requirements, there's federal law, there's state case law. It's challenging to come up with something like new and truly creative, and we don't need to, because processes work for the most part. So those stayed the same. The level of review in the processes stayed the same. We, as a group, may be making changes to the zoning code that change where stuff gets reviewed, right? We move some uses out of special use into by right approval, so they are no longer going through special use process. But the special use process itself, the golden rezoning review criteria stay as always from 1978. Anyone remember the year? Is that the year? Jeff says yes. Marcy? Yes. Yes, that was it. Okay. All right. It was a good year for disco. Subdivision procedures stay the same. The non-conformity section stays the same. We may be doing some additional clarification in there, but the city already has a fairly generous section on non-conformities, and then violations and enforcement stay the same. So hang on one second. Okay, we got some discussion items. Before we get to those, do you want to back up into any of the update or stay the same categories? I do that all the time. I feel so much better that you're doing it. Like I cannot figure out forward and backwards. Any big questions on any?
2 things. One, I think you made the good point, which is that the procedures haven't changed that much. What might be covered by the procedures for module 1 and 2?
Yep.
Or where I think the discussion shall be.
Yep.
But there was a new provision called like administrative
Adjustment?
Not adjustment,
No.
administrative decision, administrative,
Appeal of an administrative decision?
yeah,
Administrative applications.
I mean, well, so we got both of those. So
Yes.
administrative applications is anything that's already been approved by staff, but we create a general category. So like, sign permit might go through that way, or something that just typically goes to staff. Codes are usually silent about how that works, so we just want to say, hey, staff is reviewing it against the criteria in the regulations.
I realize there's already a procedure.
Yeah.
But as Brad indicated, the uses to which that procedure will apply are considerably different under the new code than they are under the existing code.
Well, so the list that you saw in there, Phil, was us asking staff, hey, these are things that typically go through administrative review. Does Lawrence do these things? So we may not be putting that full list in there. We're just like trying to fill in the blanks and double check, are we missing something? What you're saying though, in terms of site plan, which is administrative review, there may be some changes in there. So let's come back. to
Okay.
that. Because appeal of administrative determination is just BZA appeal. Just calling that out as a separate process also, but that's statutory, so that one exists.
I think some of Phil's questions he's gonna go through will come back to this administrative decision.
Okay.
This question of
Okay.
what, how do we see what, but,
Yep.
okay.
Okay, anything else in here?
So I think I've got, and I don't know if this is the right place to talk about it, but, we take through a zoning application, get a zoning application approved. And then the next step is we come in with what? Like, if I'm gonna do a 20-lot, single-family development, where is in here the criteria, what used to be a preliminary plat?
It's gonna stay exactly the same and it's in its own chapter right now because of the shared subdivision regulations.
We have not seen that chapter yet.
It hasn't been changed. So we're just gonna carry forward current code on the subdivision.
Okay, but in this early part, we continue to refer to everything else but the preliminary and final plat. And in the review process, we ought to include that in there, because I mean, it's noticeably absent.
Yes, it will be coming in
Okay,
exactly as is from subdivision regulations. No changes.
okay, but
Question? Yeah, and some of these items that are moved into the administrative approval category, do any or all of them have an appeal process such as like the site plan does?
Appeal from an administrative decision is to the Board of Zoning Adjustment.
It would be, yeah.
Is any administrative decision.
And what determines the length of time for that appeal
I
process?
believe it's like 15 or 30 days. It's in the code.
I don't need to know now, but yeah.
Oh, you had another question?
well, it's just an add-on to that. So
Yeah.
the time constraints
Mhm.
of meeting a submittal deadline for the whole planning process, is that also carried over and follows the same schedule?
If there are statutory limitations on how long staff has to do that, that gets carried forward. And since we haven't pulled those forward yet, I haven't double checked them, but
Okay.
I would assume if they're in there and they're based on statute, they stay.
So in what section does that get put in? I mean, when that gets carried over, is that still section?
Right, because subdivision is the shared thing between city and county. We talked about, do we pull them apart? Do we leave it together? I think our last discussion with staff was it's gonna be simpler all the way around if we do what we're used to. So subdivision design and subdivision procedures will be rebuilt into the shared subdivision regulations.
Built into this.
Yeah, built into this.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. Any questions? Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so this question we sent out to you guys with the agenda. And if you see in this, this column right here, so meetings, neighborhood meetings, we currently require a neighborhood meeting for plan development, preliminary development plan. And if I understood it correctly, which it took me a few goes with Becky to get it straight, that's the only place where it's currently required. So last meeting, we talked about, do we move any public input forward? Do we move any neighborhood meetings, or we were in the project? So I wanted to check in and see if there were, if I've got it wrong here, and if there are any of these applications that go to the commission, or the BZA, from a neighborhood meeting would be for the neighborhood and the applicant.
What is D?
Decision.
In the various boxes up there.
He is decision, they make the decision. So that city commission is the decision maker and they have the public hearing. Those are the two little heads.
That's, okay, so under appeal of administrative decisions, the BZA, the D with the two little heads represents what again?
Decision maker in a public hearing.
Decision.
And we can move away from the two little heads. It's too cutesy. That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
See.
You do enough of the, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna put some heads on.
It seems to me some of the more impactful processes, rezoning, special uses would make those be two areas for a neighborhood meeting. I get no.
Well, I think
To the group, let's talk pros and cons, because Michael's called out the two, we see it not often, in other communities. So pros are, we're having this neighborhood meeting and, the applicant gets to hear the neighbor's early concerns, before we get to public hearing, and may adjust the project, may not. Cons are some of the same things that we've seen in doing this project. You can throw a party and people don't show up for it. And so you've put together the time and effort and materials to have a neighborhood meeting, and there are no neighbors. And so when you come back and you're in front of planning commission or city commission and they say, what happened at the neighborhood meeting? You say nobody showed up, but they certainly showed up for the hearing. And so the intentions are good, because that's a way better time in the design process to make changes, to understand that the neighborhoods don't like the dog kennels you're putting in the back. But, you know, it is sometimes more wishful thinking than actual helpfulness. So
Does that statistic more often apply to like organized neighborhoods as opposed to random subdivisions, for example?
So you would do notice for a neighborhood meeting in probably the same way you do notice for the application. So for like rezoning, you notice everybody within the 400 feet. So that would constitute the neighborhood. Plus, if there are any officially recognized neighborhood organizations, they would get notice. So it's probably a little broader than just the neighborhood organization.
What if it were by request? If the neighborhood had some particular concern and they were focused, they could request a meeting.
I'm not sure how they would know the application is going on. I guess you could have the applicant reach out to the neighborhood association and say, I could have a meeting. Do you guys want to hear about it?
when would you, well, for the PUD, when is it triggered? Application date, so many days of the application, pre-application?
I don't remember that off the top of my head.
Double check here, but I think it's
And
before
for a
application.
zoning map amendment, you won't know where the dog kennels are.
That's right. Say.
I mean, so
Right.
you don't have any information to share.
No, that's the challenging part. Yep.
That's-
Biggest challenge, especially with affordable housing, because we don't have the funds up front to make those. We don't want to spend that money to design it before we know we have a site control or something to do with it.
Nobody wants
Which
to
is,
spend.
I know no one does, but
Yeah,
But
no,
in
but
what
it's,
we're trying to create more of, it has a particular hard time fronting those soft costs.
It does, I do think I've seen somewhere in one of the meetings is that, like I said, an opt-in or an opt-out sort of thing. Almost like, when the notice goes out, not for the meeting, but the notice of application goes out, the neighborhood has, 20 days to respond and ask for a meeting. As opposed to, it has to be a meeting. And sometimes neighborhoods do and sometimes they don't.
We're
But
seeing
at
more
least
of
it
Yep.
puts instead of making it happen, it is this and, and then the application's online, they can see what the application is. It might be something they're interested in. I mean, I've seen that in other codes.
and not all locations are gonna be conducive to a neighborhood meeting at a walkable location.
We finished the sidewalk plan. It would be- That's in 250 years. I learned it.
Yeah.
Well, strong feelings about adding a neighborhood meeting in. I guess I would say, kind of like our last discussion, in theory, if there's more things allowed by right, you will have less zoning map amendments, right? Because we're going from however many districts, 15 districts to 8, I can't get the number right, but whatever the number is. So there'd be less zoning amendments because we have less zoning districts. In theory, more mixed use. I mean, you wouldn't be rezoning for commercial to add something because you have a mixed use by right. So it would, it should in theory reduce the number of these, but if you, of course, if you're going from residential to commercial, that's a rezoning, or residential to mixed use under the new code.
So I'm gonna hold the thought for a second.
Yep,
You have to do the neighborhood meeting within 6 months of application, 180 days of application. And notice goes out within 1,000 feet of the project, so it's wider notice,
So
the way it's drafted.
1,000 feet in the county.
What's that?
That is 1,000 feet in the county and 400 feet in the city.
I think that,
We've extended it,
but
just for neighborhood meetings,
that's.
just for now, not for regular notice, just neighborhood meeting notice. Okay, so
Okay,
let's hold your thought a second, because I have made a recommendation that may bring us back to this. So we're considering rezoning or special use possibly. We're gonna hold the thought. Let's do the next slide. So these are two recommendations that come hand in hand. How much can we pare back what city commission needs to review for special use and for rezoning in terms of the information submitted with the application? So the question is, and maybe I'm understanding it wrong, maybe you're doing it now, but can we approve a special use as a concept? And can we approve rezoning because it implements the plan without looking at any design on the site or looking at minimal design on the site? And if you go to the next slide, this real specific question is, can we get rid of conditional zoning? Or can we at least get rid of use and density changes within conditional?
Who said yes right away? Was that you, Jim?
Nobody put me up for this.
That's a big problem.
And you might explain what conditional zoning is for the people in the room?
People in the room who don't spend their days reading zoning codes. So conditional zoning is when the city allows a rezoning with conditions on it. And so it could be, yes, we're going to rezone you commercial, but you're not allowed pet shops. Or yes, we're going to rezone you residential, but even though your density allows 72 units, you can do 16. And so what we're doing here is doing site-by-site limitation on development. And it is low-key problematic long-term because everything is its own individual zoning at this point. And it encourages more debate about the development than maybe should happen if the development is in compliance with the code and the comprehensive plan. So this is saying essentially, yeah, we have a plan, yep, we have a code, but we may not be done yet. We may be putting more restrictions on what can happen here. And so it is, I want to tell you, it's a minority approach to rezoning that is not done across the country this way. It is more often that you see straight up rezoning, you're in an open district, you can develop what's in that district, and then you bring in a site plan, and that's what gets approved. And if you meet the code, your site plan gets approved. That is one way we get to more housing. This is a longer, potentially more expensive process.
Problem we had in Lawrence was somebody wanted to do a specific use, but it couldn't be in that zoning district. So they wanted to zone to the higher use district and then eliminate everything you
Everything else.
want. So you could end up with one or two use. And it was just, how is that different from spot zoning is what were the arguments.
Well, if it's different from spot zoning, which is the bane of my existence, because nobody cut a deal to do it. That is part of what a spot zoning
It was
is.
a deal.
It's-
It was a
it's an
negotiated, it was a
above
negotiated
deal. I'm to assume it's an above board.
deal with the planning department.
I don't want to hear that. But, yeah, so this is one of the first things that we heard coming into the project, and Gabby would be here, but she's getting something else adopted tonight. Why does everything take so long and why is it so complicated? This is part of it. And so if the code, as we're doing it, implements the plan as the city adopted it, can we get this out of the way?
We had another instance that was just kind of opposite of that,
That's right.
which is somebody wanted a lower industrial use zoning, but it was one lot in a block of all residential housing. So then they said, well, you can't have a drive-through or you can't have, and there were some specific things that would have been very awkward for the neighborhood had the planning commission left them in. The one thing they didn't do was draw a little map of how much of the area was going to be allowed to be developed, and it turns out it was 5 foot wide. So we probably shouldn't have ever gone there, but in terms of conditional zoning, how else do you react to those particular places that maybe the zoning is inappropriate right now, but you're trying to figure out what use would work?
So that's part of the reason we're doing the new districts, right? So someone in that situation maybe could have rezoned to mixed use, which might work with residential. And if they were doing fully internal industrial that didn't have any external impacts, we've updated the use table to talk about where all of that goes. So, you know, in theory, we could get them there. Sometimes the answer might be no. And I realize that that's not a great answer either, because sometimes conditional zoning gets you to yes, when you otherwise wouldn't have gotten to yes.
Mhm.
Is it worth it? I think is the question.
I mean, from my time on the planning commission and otherwise, I mean, I tend to agree with your analysis, which is, in a few occasions, it gets us to yes, where we would not otherwise get to yes. But it slows down many projects, many projects, without much gain to it. You know, we're not gonna, you can't have any, was the one that was really famous for a while, no payday loans. We're gonna conditionally use this as, you can have anything other use, but we don't like payday loans in our neighborhood, so we can't have payday loans. That was the one condition. We did that. That was a fad there for a while.
Well, I see a difference between conditional zoning and zoning with conditions, because conditional zoning is the one I was saying, which was you change the zoning category where you allow more obnoxious uses sometimes next to a neighborhood, except you X out every one. That's your payday loan. Because that happened quite a bit, that happened quite a bit in East Lawrence.
As a form of spot zoning.
That's the one I think is close to that. But then the other one that Marcy just mentioned was we'll grant the rezoning, but we put these conditions on the new zoning. So it was, and that's what the current code was trying to get to with the modification. Because when I was raising that issue and it came back and nobody could say what conditional zoning was, and the planning staff had to come up with a definition and a process to review. And while I was on the planning condition, that's mostly been used in what was the business park out off of Wakarusa, which was a strange zoning that nobody ever wanted to use. So that was getting conditional zoning changes. So that was a difference. I just see that we finally saw them as different. There were multiple different ways that it was being used in a city.
If we're trying to achieve more mixed use, and
Right.
my emphasis on mixed use is that it has to have very small scale neighborhood commercial. If we're going to have a 15-minute walkable neighborhood, have to have places for people to walk to. So I'd like to see more small commercial availability use groups or whatever than even now. I want to see more. So it could be more controversial as a result. So it looks like it might cut both ways, but I feel like eliminating this probably would be to our advantage.
Mike, you're saying you want more than M1, M2, and M3?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure.
What
You know,
uses
it
in
says
each
sometimes limited commercial, what, you know, I don't know what limited means.
Yeah, that,
I'd rather have
that's
more
part of the whole
unlimited.
problem is.
Yeah.
What's the, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, if the mixed uses ought to take care of a lot of the stuff that we were always trying to include, and that's what I thought that would achieve. You know, in my thinking, and I don't know if this makes sense to anybody else, is that the conditional zoning was, are you trying to get to yes, or are you trying to avoid a no?
Yeah.
And,
Okay with that?
All right.
you walk out of the room?
I'm a telephone neophyte spam. Telephone neophyte, forgot to turn the damn thing off.
Phil, following up on that, I'd also, I mean, I could say it later, but I might as well say it now. I'd like to see R1 eliminated. If we're going to eliminate single dwelling zoning, that's the one to go. I think all zoning should be mixed use with commercial, with commercial mixed use. So that's my position, just for full disclosure.
Can you go back to the slide before this? The one on special use. Kind of, like you said, it's kind of related. I do think zoning can be on the concept stage, but special use is always very,
Need the
very
level of
particular.
detail.
Very, very particular. I'd be interested in this concept that you approve this. Be interested to see what folks say. What happens a lot when the special use, we say, okay, fine, it's going to be a whatever by special use. And then we spend a whole lot of time, talking about, is it 9:30 or 9:45 that it closes, or is it this or that? So I guess that's the question of where would that be an administrative determination? Like some of those conditions on the special use?
So I think, what would happen in this case is, I agree with you, it's harder to do the special use without something.
Yeah.
And so what would that concept plan include, and what would be the basic, conditions that city commission would put on it? So you would probably end up arguing through the 9:45, 10 o'clock closing time, or when your security lights turn off.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is, but the goal is to get you out of those weeds and you know, in terms of the design and the site layout, all of those things that are already in the code be just subject to administrative site plan. So maybe it is that, you know, staff brings it through and says code doesn't cover hours of operation or bike parking or whatever it is that they think that city commission would normally want to look at outside of the regulations.
Yeah, I do think those things are what, and especially use what the neighbors want to talk about. So I think I can see that hybrid version.
Mhm.
And it could end up at the city commission anyway.
No.
All right.
Well, strong feelings on conditional zoning? It seems like back when I was on the planning commission, we didn't have conditional zoning and we started running into these situations where we wanted to make exceptions, so then we amended the code to allow it.
That's what we finally did with the mixed use.
Yeah.
The one on Elm Street wanted commercial underneath the apartment. So it was done citywide by a text amendment instead of one specific plot.
So I guess I would lean towards your idea that, hey, let's give this new code a shot as it's written. And not allow the conditional zoning, and if we find out, you know, let's handle it through text amendments rather than through conditional zoning.
I think that's the alternative. And if maybe if you're leaning into doing conditional zoning, is it telling you that you need to amend the text anyhow? And it was just faster to get around it. And I mean that not in a bad way, but it's just more expedient to get around it by doing the conditional zoning. But what about the next applicant that comes through? So maybe making the text change.
Argument is, it's good for this one applicant at this one spot. It should be good.
Yeah.
Anywhere in the city.
Right.
And that's why we favored the text amendment.
But doesn't the rezone, I mean, going with this M1, M2 and M3 and looking at the conjunction between the base zoning district and the uses, aren't the uses broad enough to encompass almost everything you want to do? I mean, I know you can't foresee the future, but I mean,
Well, certainly under this new code, there'll be more uses, so the chances of having conditional zoning are less than there was in the old code, for sure, no question.
okay.
And we've always thought that.
We've always thought that it's never proved to be the case, huh?
Somebody
All
will
right,
find something.
all right, I got you.
Okay,
Okay, all right. We can come back to this, but that is moving us forward. So Luke, can we skip that one, do the next one? Okay, so we had a couple other discussion items that we wanted to bring forward related to how we get to yes. Should there be, and we haven't talked about this, so this will be new to everyone, so I'll back up and do a little more explanation. Should there be a fast track approval process for any types of development, such as, and this is usually what it's done for, affordable housing? And that should be capital A, affordable housing that is affordable to very low and low income persons. And so fast track approval, as it works in many communities, is we will take your application and we will get it through in 60 to 90 days. Why do we do that for affordable housing? Because affordable housing is particularly sensitive to the cost of development. So the faster we can move it through, the better it is for that development to take place. So then we get the next question. What do you mean you're gonna jam up my project because you're gonna put that affordable housing at the front of the line and I'm never gonna get approved? So the odds of this happening with great regularity are quite low, because housing that meets the definition of affordable housing does not come through the process every day of the week. I'm looking at you and you're agreeing with me. Thank you. So it is a
It doesn't
special-
make money.
It doesn't make money, right? It's a special situation. This is something that we are seeing in other communities across the country, particularly in the communities that Commissioner Finkeldine pointed out earlier. A lot of it in California and Washington. So I put it up there as a question. some communities use it as an incentive. So we want to see affordable housing, but we also want to see more townhouses, or we want to see more housing that does something. And you could set up fast track for that also. So this is something we hadn't really talked about. It's a little bit niche, but I wanted to see if there was any interest in the steering committee to discuss it.
I have more of a clarification question. So a lot of the stuff that I would say we collectively have said we want for Plan 2040 would now be sort of by right and able to be administratively approved. Are you referring to that and being faster than that? Or are you referring to stuff that has to go through the whole rigmarole of like a text amendment or a zoning change or stuff like that?
So I think what we would do here is it doesn't matter what type of approval it needs. We would say if it's administrative or not, that the city will seek to have it approved in 60 to 90 days. So rarely it might jump the line on like other rezonings if that needs to happen. But otherwise it would just, it would be moved through with a minimum of negotiation and a lot of emphasis on, let's just say yes, unless there's something horrifically wrong with us.
How long do administrative approvals take, I guess, as of now, or how long are they envisioned to take in the future?
Well, administratively, right now, if you put a site plan in, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to go through the process. So the planning commission takes longer because they work on a 60-day lead up calendar, so they could be 4 to 6 months on a rezone potentially, or a special use permit, just, ballparkish.
So I guess I'm just asking for the case of the by right thing. So like, say you have a large single family home and you want to subdivide it into duplex, which according to what we have currently in the draft is now by right thing. Could you just submit an application, whatever that may look like? And is that a 4 to 6 week thing essentially?
Can't remember, I don't think we do site plans on duplexes in the new code, so it would really just go direct to building permits.
Okay.
But clarification though, so if we submit a rezoning for a 20-lot subdivision, the zoning gets approved, then by right, we get to build our 20 lots. So then we can have to take a preliminary plat through that doesn't go before any governing body at that point, right? And then we have a final plat that has to go through that doesn't go before any governing body. And then we have to take all the engineering drawings. I mean, this would be all of Rebecca's projects, right? And then that, all the engineering, the preliminary plat, and then all the engineering. I mean, in today's terms, that whole process is 9 months, maybe a year.
Yeah, my 7 houses on Harper took 9 months.
Yeah.
And that's, but again, that was infill. We want infill, we want affordability, we want to reuse these 2 giant lots, but we had to do the work to do that.
No rezoning. No rezoning.
That was also.
By right.
No rezoning.
The preliminary plat does have to go to the planning commission though, so that does. fit on that side.
In today's code, the preliminary plat still goes to.
Not changing the subdivision regulations, so it still goes.
Still
Yeah.
goes, yeah.
Yep, and subdivision is our legal method of selling lots, so, and putting infrastructure in.
That's not, it's the final plat is your legal method of selling. So maybe you said that, yes.
Well, the whole process, I mean, you can't just skip the final plat unless city lets you, and there's not a lot going on. For the most part, there's a lot of review taking place there, is there not?
50-50, yeah.
Yep, so, okay,
Would
so.
Would the fast track option include the previously approved building plans? Some people are doing the.
Well, so that's a question that we can explore, and let's roll that into the next one. So, no, back up. Thank you, sorry, just the next question. Sorry, Luke. Luke and I haven't practiced. We're doing great. Okay. Looping back on an earlier discussion and thinking about how we get development approved and thinking about that duplex that is going to cause some people great heartburn. I wanted to ask the group, would it help if we looked at putting building type regulations in the code? And so if we said, if you're in Oriad, you can have, and I use the cartoon on purpose. It will not be cartoon in the code, but you can have the orange and the blue and definitely not the beige ranch, doesn't fit. Do we think, and I know there've been conversations going on, Phil is trying to visualize what can happen and Lan is talking about what goes in where. Do we need this code to go to the level of, in some places you can only do, top, bottom or front, back duplex. In some places, you can't do single family wide ranch. You have to go, tall and narrow. Is that something we want to explore over the next few weeks before this code really hits the public?
Bill?
I'm gonna go back to talking about an original town site ordinance, because those are the lots that it matters and they're different shapes. Okay, so it's not that, I mean, we have plenty of long strung out buildings in Oriad.
Right.
And the most interesting thing about Oriad is that it took so long to develop over time because we had the grasshoppers and we had the railroad fiasco and whatever. So we have a lot of different building types. I don't think this is in some ways like neighborhoods in St. Louis where everything gets built all at the same time and it's a strong type. But it's more the shape of the lot in some ways, and we don't distinguish that at all in our codes.
Okay, that's a strong explanation. Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Well, that's the very reason East Lawrence was so difficult and ended up being zoned to use, because it is such a wide variety of sizes and shapes of lots. There was no other way to do it.
Okay.
So it is, there are certain parts of town. I'm in the Barker neighborhood. We have, I think, just about every one of those
All of them and then.
in our neighborhood
Yeah.
because of how it developed over time. But
So, okay, so I hear from Marcy is that it may not be a neighborhood by neighborhood thing, but it might be a lot dimension by lot dimension thing, but then it's gonna change from neighborhood to neighborhood. So I'm thinking this is maybe not helpful.
But I think some differentiation by lots would make sense, because we've gone through every lot or almost every lot in Oriad was 50 by 117, and then you couldn't build a house unless you had 60 feet, and so even if you had two lots, you couldn't build on the empty part of the second one because it was only 50 foot, so that messed things up much more than like just type of housing. But we've never gotten the subdivision regulations to fit the older parts of town or and I'm just going to say original town site. That is such a strong line, right? You can say this is what was recorded.
But the new code with the dimensional standards and the implementation standards and the desire for densification and the possibilities for alternative housing forms, all the things that you put forward in skeletal form, that they should take care of building type should arise out of that, in my opinion, should arise out of that code, out of a clear specification of those, of those features in the code.
I agree. And yet I'm always surprised.
Well, I think about things at a superficial level, so I get you.
And maybe that is it. Maybe it's it's just the design preferences of the home builder or the developer, what they have done previously.
And what they can afford to do.
And what they can afford to do, exactly. Yeah. Are you done with that thought?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Go ahead, Nick.
Spiral another direction.
Is it okay?
Do you think that the existence of neighborhood design guidelines kind of achieves some of the intent of what the building type regulations would do, in that we don't want to see stuff with vertical siding, for example? I don't know, I'm just throwing out kind of an arbitrary regulation, but would those neighborhood design guidelines kind of help guide the aesthetic of the development that people want to see, while the overall form and shape would probably be more guided by like Phil was saying, the zoning rules, right?
Box in the zoning, yeah.
Dimensions.
Yeah, I thought about that and think that that would be a preferable way to do it because it's done at the neighborhood level. But I'm trying to recognize that not all neighborhoods have that level of design standard. So just wanted to explore this piece, once more before we go out. Because now, when we first did it was, last year, and we were new to what we're doing, and now that you're all experts in zoning, we got this. So
It feels like it's limiting what we're trying to expand, especially building type. And again, for the goals of affordable housing, and some of that is being able to add different types that fit in the lots.
okay.
I'm intrigued a little bit about your comments about duplexes. Do we want to see up and down duplexes or do we want to see, back to front? I think that's kind of more interesting just than building type. And then tell me when we can get back to number one.
Well, so we could also just do it as an educational piece in the code, and say all of these types fit. But, if you're in an older neighborhood, would you, consider scale and surrounding? So it's gonna be more guidelines, which people get frustrated with guidelines because, staff can't enforce them. And then it's who is planning commission or city commission strong arming.
But those things, in the case of the duplex or the duplex conversion in particular, those aren't gonna go to the planning commission or the city commission.
No, so that's why you would put this in the code. It would be something that's
right.
could regulate against.
Okay, you want to go back to one?
Well, the fast track approval process, I'm sort of, who do we see as the developers of affordable housing? Is it tenants to homeowners, or is this open to any developer in terms of fast track? Because I think that really changes my idea of, is it wide open, or do we say the city, you can register as an affordable housing?
I have an idea to build off that. So
Okay.
in kind of a very different context, there is a fast track visa process for certain countries where there is a desired list of jobs that like, we need these people right now.
Right.
Like you guys go right in front of line. If you are a nurse or coder or fireman, come on out to Denmark. And it changes year to year. So one year, my particular application or occupation was on it. It's no longer on there. And it'll change depending on, the market, policies, foreign affairs, whatever. It might be interesting to just have the fast track framework in there and have a list that maybe, it's a lot of work, right? But that gets updated every couple of years, for like, yeah, we actually do have a lot of affordable housing. We're fine. That's never going to happen. But say that actually we do meet our goals. I'm like, we're good on housing for a while. Actually, we want payday loans. We don't have enough of those. Okay, let's fast track those bad boys. And then it could change based on kind of, yeah, based on the whims and changes of society, right? I don't know. Is that a possibility? Or is that too complicated?
It's not too complicated to draft. The trick would be keeping it updated.
Yeah, whose job is that, right?
But to your point, with combining those two, you could say tenants to homeowners and gets fast tracking. Is that what you're saying? Like just tenants to homeowners?
Yeah.
Not any big capital A.
But I guess if a private developer
Yeah, I want
comes in
private-
with a project just like what tenants.
Yeah, no, I'm just, that's why I'm
Why
asking the
don't
question.
they get to
That's
have?
why I'm asking.
I would think we'd use our definition of capital A affordable housing, right?
Yeah, and so, what.
Because
we
the
have also
reality
seen
is,
in addition to doing it for 100% affordable housing, there are communities who say if you have 10% affordable housing, or if you have 2 units of affordable housing, that can get you there. So if the city thinks that its incentive would incentivize developers to team with affordable developers or to add their own affordable product, which some of the biggest developers do, then this could be something where you could, get an 80% market rate, 20% affordable project through, because.
So that threshold would need to be.
We could set the threshold where the city thinks it's appropriate.
I guess what I was trying to say before Nick, well, you're trying to say add like tenants to homeowners, you're saying affordable housing could be one, and we could later say senior housing.
It could go either
We
way.
could say,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was trying to ask what you were trying to get at there.
I
Trying
was
to
not that
expand
clear.
affordable housing or to expand who within affordable housing? That's the question.
I think there's a couple of answers to that question. So I think the what is built is one thing that you could control for. The who builds it is another thing you could control for, and the who is it built for that you could control for as well. And you could even just have different categories kind of mix and match. I mean, in some cases, big A affordable housing, for example, hits a demographic who builds it, a demographic who it's meant for, and the type of building. So it kind of hits all three. But in some cases, you could even do something, I don't know. I feel like this is so cliche Lawrence at this point, but just throwing it out there from an equity standpoint, if you have a developer who is from some kind of, disadvantaged demographic, like a single mother or an indigenous person who wants to build something, do we incentivize that, which is kind of an equity related thing. It's not that everybody has equal footing. It's that people who have historically been disadvantaged for at least this time can get a leg up. Or if somebody, say, wants to develop a new business of some sort, and that person is like a first-time business owner, then do we put them on the fast track?
I love what we do for affordable housing, but I think special treatment for that nobody else gets is not fair. I mean, it is not reasonable. I think if, we're short every kind of housing there is, every market segment there is in Lawrence right now. So they all ought to be fast tracked. We're just dying for every single one. I mean, what are we at building permits right now? 17 or something like that,
Well, I think I disagree in a sense that I think we should be incentivizing some kind of housing that we'd like to see a proportionally larger amount than just the general mix. In addition to affordability or for elderly or whatever, I could see, considering climate change, that we have zero net energy housing as one of those incentivized, or houses, that incorporate solar electricity. I mean, there are various values that I think, at least at certain times, like Nick mentioned, maybe it would change over time, but at certain times, some things should be emphasized more. I think, like zero net energy housing is one of those, for example.
But now we're back to how do you incentivize everything? People
It's just a
can be on that list. And this code needs to protect the rest of the community. So once you fast track it and something goes wrong, you're already into having created a problem. I mean, what can we fast track that then leaves out the planning commission or the city commission or notification of the neighbors or the other things that we expect to happen? And particularly when you are talking about, say, 10% affordable housing, there might be some things that people don't want developed downtown. Just because of its impact. And then you say, oh, 10% affordable housing, you can have sort of whatever you want.
So I'm going to push back on that just a bit.
Is it permanent?
I'm thinking and I know you can see into my head, which is really good. What I think we could do is put a fast track process framework in place, like where Nick was. But I think the city would need to come up with policy about what those priorities are and possibly where you'd like to see it in the city. And that would be the public discussion piece of it. And then after that, with that in place, then if it complies with the regulations in the code, it could go forward. So I do think you've identified some big places where people would want to be involved, but we'd want them involved upfront, not at the end, because if we bring them in the end and we fast tracked it, we're going to throw it off that track altogether because we're going to have arguments about affordable housing, which is everybody's been around for a round or two of those. So I think it might be two parts. So I'm looking at my watch and I realize that we're in under an hour. Yeah.
Our affordable housing administrator is online and she's got her hand raised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Muted. Hi, I'm Leah Roseland, the Affordable Housing Administrator. So I just wanted to chime in that the Fact Trust approval for affordable housing developments is one of the recommendations that the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has made, and would highly recommend that. And in addition, am so supportive of the conversation regarding incentivizing inclusion of a certain percentage of affordable units, but suggests that we really need to look at that carefully and find the right percentage level for what types of incentives. And I'm not sure that 10% is it. It might be, but I'm just not sure that we've looked at that. We have discussed quite a bit the Austin model, which sort of tiers the incentives. So with not only based on more affordable units, but the AMI level that those units are serving, and would recommend that both of those be taken into account. Thanks for letting me chime in.
Thank you, Leah. Well, again, we're getting on some time here. I mean, I don't think we have an answer. I mean, I think if you provide us a framework, either not in the code or something we could consider later
Yep.
as an amendment to the code.
Yep. I think that.
I kind of agree.
Because you'd want bigger community discussion.
On what that is.
Yeah.
I think having that as a module we could have later as a text amendment or
Yeah.
something, but for now, let's focus.
Okay.
Can I add one thing in that? If you're putting a list of potential fast track things, you had a really skeletal piece in module 2 on local employee residence units.
Workforce housing. Mhm.
Yeah, yes, I would hope that might find its way into this fast track process if it does in fact move forward.
I mean, that's affordable housing.
Okay, depending on how you do affordable housing, that workforce housing is.
I mean, I do want to push back a little bit. 46% of the households in Lawrence qualify for affordable housing. So this is not a tiny niche of people. So I do think we've got to acknowledge that we keep saying we need this, but you can't have it. You can't not incentivize it and expect it to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's important that we define what we mean when we say affordable housing, because it's not just Section 8, it's not.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a lot broader in our community, depending on what definition you're using.
I agree.
Okay, so I will own this and take it back within housing discussion and put a draft out. And then we can decide if it's a next round or if it's worth going in this round. I wanted to spend just a few minutes on this. So you guys have this whole table in the agenda for this evening's meeting. So this is where we're starting to pull together a discussion about what's in Plan 2040. So those are the two columns on the left. These are the action items and the goal. So AI is action item, not artificial intelligence. And G is a goal. And so then when you read across the row, we're starting to put in the LGC section where we've made changes or updates that implement what's in the plan. And so I just wanted to spend a few minutes on this tonight, talking about how do we start sharing the full story with the community. So we've found in the past that a table like this can be helpful in directing people where to find the things that they want to look at. So what is, if I only care about landscaping standards, where do I find that? But what I wanted to check with the group is, do we want to add any more detail than it is in the plan and it's in the code? Do we want to provide a basic explanation? How do we take all of the work we've been doing, boil it down to a pretty short description, because, not everyone wants to jump in and read everything, and start taking this out to the community. And this is one piece of it. I've got a few more things to talk about that we're going to want to do. But this is what we found in other communities has been quite helpful. And I just wanted to get your initial feedback about where we might want to go with this as a group. Is it enough to use it as a reference document? Do we want to provide some basic explanation? Or do we want to, in addition to this, do more of a written FAQ? and say, okay, if you care about landscaping materials, you should know that we have changed the regulations to reference natural and native plants. I guess they're all natural, or maybe unnatural, who knows? You'll find it in this section, and here are the biggest changes. So this is the cover sheet to a longer document. And I realize, like, I'm the one in the room who's done this before, but you know, you guys have a feel now for how much is in here compared to what we're saying there. And I wanted to know if you had any guidance for us as we get going. The other piece that we're gonna do is illustrated zoning district descriptions. So you're in this district. Here's what you can do here. Here's some of the infill or redevelopment housing that could happen here, or some of the infill or redevelopment, mixed use or commercial development that could happen here. So we can help people start visualizing how those districts could change over time.
I guess my thought, I mean, one, I mean, I like. I think we might need more description as you're just
Yeah.
talking about than this, but I think this chart is pretty helpful as it is without making it longer if you just want to go find something.
Yep.
You know, and I think it references where you want to go find and allows you to jump right to that. I mean, I think, you know, eventually it'd be great if it was in the form that you could link and just,
Yeah, we can do that.
just link
Yep.
to
Yep.
section 2905, because I'm interested in that section.
Yep.
So I like that. I mean, I do think what you were just talking about, and you and I've talked about a little bit, about having some more visuals
Yep, yep,
and highlighting that website that we started with on
the zoning.
the zoning map.
Yep.
What's your zoning now? What's it going to be? And then be able to click on that and say, here's,
District, yeah, or
I think-
click on it,
I
yeah.
think that's what most people care about. I mean, a lot of the people care about all of this, but most people want to go look up their house and see what their house is.
It's true.
And then and then maybe their
Or the
kid's house, and
business
see what happened to their kid's
Yep.
house.
Yep.
That's what they're most interested in, so that zoning map, and then tying that to the description.
The
to-
descriptions.
Yeah.
Okay.
But for the people who care about the details, I think this is useful.
It'll get in there. I think we're gonna expand it just a little bit. I just kind of threw this
Yeah.
together so everybody could see, but this is where it goes.
But you said you found FAQ, you know, kind of basics of what's changing.
Yep.
I can imagine that being extremely helpful, especially for people who don't look at
Who don't-
planning code all day long, right?
Exactly, exactly.
I'll be happy to send you some notes on this because, you know, of course, when you say manage land resources for natural function and sustainability, I'm back up to stormwater management and open streams. And then, you know, when we talk about regulations and incentives, we're really now, I think, more relying on our building codes than we are saying, I mean, bicycle and pedestrian circulation are good, but it's the greenhouse gas emissions are going to be based or helped by the building code much more than some of the rest of what we're doing.
Yeah, so thanks for pointing that out, and I would love your notes if you want to send
Okay.
them. So, you know, we all know there's lots of stuff in the comp plan that we don't do through the code.
Mhm.
And I just normally don't talk about it because that's not what we're doing, but we could put, you know, we could put at the beginning, hey, there are other documents that address some things in case not everybody knows where we're going with that. Just for, you know, if they're like, why didn't you do anything about greenhouse gas emissions? We can say it's an energy code and the city's in the process of, or has just adopted. Jeff, did you just adopt it or are you in the process of it?
The process.
Okay. I'll just put in process and you can be locked in there forever. Always in process.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay,
That was some of the things
Okay.
people are looking for,
yep,
and then if they haven't, because they might be looking for it, and then when they don't see it, they'll have that question.
okay, cool.
Okay, you had one, two more slides, we might get to Phil's thing, or you?
Have a ton, go ahead. Let's back
Yes.
up, let's go ahead and do that. Let's do the next conversation, Phil and Michael, because we'll do next steps after they're done.
Okay. Phil is not, Phil had put out this letter and then got some questions. We got that out on the agenda late today. And there's a second page, I think. But Phil, you want to lead off the conversation and then we can get to your question.
Thanks. Yeah, I probably write more coherently than I talk. But, you know, I had, written a piece that, you know, that I wanted you all to respond to. And basically my perspective and the way that I've been following the code centers almost entirely on the notion of infill densification, denser forms, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, permitted by right in existing neighborhoods. And how do we do that? I mean, it's a fiscal and environmental imperative that we do so. The question is, what the challenge for the code is, how do we do that and maintain strong and healthy neighborhoods? How do we densify, you know, and we're gonna do it by right. It's gonna be, that's the way the code's set up right now. It's gonna be administratively permitted.
Only if you don't have a homeowners association.
Well, yes, those
I mean,
people.
let's remind people
Okay,
that there are
okay,
going to be
yeah.
haves and have-nots.
I'm sorry. Yes, not homeowners association and existing covenants notwithstanding, it will be administratively permitted by right. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of implications there. If you get an opportunity, read the first piece, because I think it says some things that are noteworthy. The second piece, if you can flip the, right here. So I put together a hypothetical last month that I was hoping that we could get some discussion on that relates directly to the notion of densification and conversion of single-family detached units to denser forms, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. R2, the base zoning district, is about 26% of the city's, zoned land area currently, something on that order. Am I right, Jeff?
Yeah.
Something on that order. So my question is again, I tried to illustrate it through this hypothetical. I tried to bring it up as a discussion. Let's take the example. We've got a single family detached home. We're going to convert it into 2 or 3 housing units. Okay, 2,100, 2,200 square feet. The first question that seems to me like we need to ask ourselves is, are there going to be any limitations on footprint or floor space expansion? Are we going to allow this 2,200 square foot home, single family detached home, on a 5,500 to 6,000 square foot lot? Are we going to allow an expansion of 25% in the footprint, 40% in the footprint? Are we going to do it based on living space, or are we going to say build whatever you want? I mean, I think that the code needs to speak to that. And make, if it's going to be permitted administratively, I think the code needs to say, we're going to allow, right now, correct me if I'm wrong, right now for congregate living, you have a piece in there that says you can't expand the footprint by more than 20%, over X number of years. It's a little more complex than that, but that's the basic idea. There is a footprint expansion limitation. Are we going to have a footprint expansion limitation on conversion? I don't know.
As opposed to using setbacks and other.
Well, you still have to meet the design standards. No matter what, you got to meet whatever the design criteria are, you still got to meet.
So isn't that the limit?
I don't know, is it?
As the code is currently written, yeah, pretty much.
As it is right now. Is that what we want?
We haven't pushed back on it too hard, so I'm assuming, yeah.
I've been trying to.
Minority viewpoint then. I mean, if everybody else is generally okay with it, I mean, we'll see a public comment.
Well, yeah, I want to hear a discussion. I haven't heard, I mean, I don't know that it's been brought up specifically, Nick. So I wanted to hear a little bit about that from other people,
Yeah, so let's confirm first, right? Under the code as it's written, there's not a square footage
I'm not
limitation.
checking that 20% max. What I did look at first, though, was I could scrape it and put in attached housing up to 4 units. So to be equal with that, we should, if there is the 20% limit, it needs to come out.
Well, that was under the congregate living thing.
But yeah.
But okay, but under straight zoning in R2 right now. You
Right.
can have dwelling attached up to 4 units.
Right.
So I could take it down and replace it if I didn't convert it. I can scrape my lot,
Yes.
right? So
Right.
it doesn't seem to be fair to someone who wants to convert an existing home that we are kind of incentivizing scrape offs if we don't allow them to increase the footprint.
Which I don't.
You see what the point is?
I see the point in general. I don't follow the particulars and don't necessarily.
Okay, so, but pause a second. Under the current code, there's no, as the code is drafted, there's no square footage limitation on the expansion.
Mhm.
You would be limited by your setbacks
And
and,
your landscaping requirements, and if you chose to do parking, because we've eliminated parking.
okay.
That was also in that piece, that's number 3.
So the discussion you want to have is, should there be a limitation on the footprint size? And and then of course, this question about parking is an issue we've talked about, and you want to keep that parking
Right,
question down.
that plays into footprint size. Parking very, very definitely plays into it. And then fixtures, believe it or not, also plays into it when you're talking about existing neighborhoods. Okay, I mean, is the sewer capacity, under what conditions is the sewer capacity sufficient to allow you to convert to a triplex? Okay, I mean, these are things that I think need to be, if it's going to be permitted administratively, then I think that they need to be defined so that we all know, and I'm speaking broadly when I say, I think they need to be defined so that everybody understands when somebody decides to expand their 2,200 square foot house into a 6,000 square foot triplex and not provide any more parking because we took away all parking minimums. Okay, all of a sudden you have 10 more fixtures being serviced by the same sewer line. Is it going to work? Or is it just going to create additional problems, that unanticipated problems in our neighborhoods?
Well, I'm glad you brought up that question of sewer capacity. I mean, I've submitted suggestion about we need a definition for infill. What is infill? And I base it, at least in part, on the capacity of infrastructure, streets, sewer, water, stormwater. That's a key question, how much is too much? That's, I think, is this.
Get reviewed.
By who?
No, because if it's a triplex, it's not reviewed.
It's permitted by right.
Yeah. No, it's not like magically approved by God. It still has to go through MSO.
Yeah. No,
Yep.
MSO doesn't, okay, when we're in the Oriented neighborhood, we're in trouble because they do developments and it doesn't go through the sanitation. They don't have any chance to say whether they have to have a dumpster or not.
It's all an on-site review. It's not the implication in the rest of the neighborhood.
Are you talking water, wastewater, or
I'm talking about trash.
trash? Okay, I think she was talking about water and sewer capacity.
And she said, well, but I'm just saying there's things that
To ask the 2 questions, if someone converts to a duplex or a triplex or fourplex, does MSO look at sewer capacity?
Typically, yes, unless there's a reason that we would know that the capacity is clear or clean on that one. But MSO does look at our reviews when we have issues that rise up. It's part of what we do with downstream sanitary sewer analysis on projects. And it's one of the things that they're looking for is that fixture count or that fixture addition to understand the line load capacity.
But so are we looking at it on a single, we're building this one house? Or are we saying if these 8 houses all become triplexes, then what's going to happen? And I do know that the units that are being built on, it's probably Tennessee and Kentucky, 18th to 19th, they're not site planned. And you now have a mess in terms of drainage and fill because everybody's doing each lot separately. And talk to your sanitation people about that.
Okay, so things going on here. we are walking into solving citywide problems in infrastructure in the zoning code, wrong place to do it. If this is something the city wants to see, and if this implements the comprehensive plan, then the city is also going to need to account for infrastructure changes and require either the applicant to pay for the upgrades or the city will have to figure out how to pay for upgrades.
I was looking at it from the perspective of the administrative approval process and, you know.
What do you want to see, Phil? Do you want the neighbors to be able to comment on it? What's the cut?
Well, I had that down as number 7. What kind of neighborhood engagement are you gonna have? If, I think it's more important that the criteria that, because I firmly believe that there is good infill, good densification, but there can also be poor densification. And what I would hope that we would come out through the code is try to ensure ourselves of the greatest likelihood of getting good densification as opposed to poor densification.
How do you define those two?
Well, that's part, I mean, these are just, this is a very skeletal outline, but things like, you know, you're putting in a triplex, is each one gonna have to have a separate 200 amp panel? I don't want, you know, is each one gonna have to have a separate water meter? Is each one gonna, you know, is the existing distribution pressure going to be evaluated in the course of saying, this is good densification versus this is not good densification? You know, in the elephant in the room, how are we going to evaluate parking? You know, if you're going to get rid of all parking minimums for densification, what's going to be the basis for evaluating, hey, we can put this triplex in here and it's going to be good versus we're going to put this triplex in here with no off-street parking and it's going to be a mess. So what, you know, what's going to be the basis for making that determination? I know I'm lecturing and being, and I'm not trying, I'm really not.
I think that's well.
We need to get rid of the outside of the zoning code stuff. So the electricity and the sewer and the water is all handled outside of the zoning code. It has its own codes. If it doesn't meet those codes, it shouldn't get approved.
But each of the, I would argue that each of the development increments that you are permitting administratively through the code, you know, contributes to the larger, you know, result.
Yeah.
And so that
It's cumulative.
It is cumulative. I am not disagreeing with you. I'm saying that those aren't things we can solve in this code, and they do get solved in other codes.
But, okay,
And they don't necessarily get solved in other codes. And I think the question is there a way, are the other codes working so that happens? Right? Because we, you know, what do you do in Oriad where you have a row of houses that doesn't have an alley and street parking? And once you put parking on both sides of the street, you've either got a one-way street or you have to take parking off one side of that street to allow traffic to flow.
and parking is part of the code.
The parking is part of the code.
Parking is part of the code.
Yeah, she wasn't talking about that. I mean, so I guess, I think what you're suggesting is you could, I mean, I think some of those all, you know, if it's a duplex, yes, I mean, someone else, do you have to have your own code to have you have to have your own, water meter to be a duplex? That would-
I mean, every apartment has to have their own.
So what you got the thing is,
So that's what I'm saying, those things, now, if you're saying, the question is, I think what most of you were saying is, if this triplex wants to get built, they come in with a building permit, MSO checks it out, says the water's good, the sewer's good, it gets approved. Next one comes in, it gets approved. Third one comes in, oops, we don't have enough capacity. That would still be checked on the third one, and if it doesn't have enough capacity, the city would either have to improve the capacity, the developer would have to improve the capacity, or would it be built? I mean, that happens now with subdivisions. The first subdivision in, it's okay, the next time I have to upsize the pump.
Okay, how about in the case of sewer lines? A single family detached sewer line, you're gonna convert that into a duplex and put in 6 more fixtures. Are you gonna still be serviced by one sewer line, or are you gonna have to put in a separate sewer tap?
Not over my skis there. I do not have the MSO code memorized. I don't know what the state requires for sewer types.
Well, I live in a duplex and we only have one line. Okay,
Now, under current code.
Current code.
Has to have.
right, but these are conversions.
That'd be new construction.
Right, we're talking conversion here.
Conversion's gonna have to meet building code.
New
Yeah,
code.
Well,
New unit would have to have its own sewer line.
Mhm.
that was another general question that I had, what expansion in footprint or living space will be used as threshold to trigger application of quote, new construction, I mean, what constitutes new construction that has to meet the new codes?
The change of use from
a modification that
Yeah,
does not.
if you're switching to duplex or triplex, that those
Automatic.
additional units will trigger it.
So if you're going if you're going from single to a duplex use. Doesn't matter if it's 10 square feet or, 2,000 square feet, it's that change in use that triggers the new code. Once you have the new code, you have to have you have to meet the new building code. The new building code would require you to have a new sewer line for that new unit.
It's not, okay, okay, it's not a change in use, it's still, it's.
That's called a change in use. The change in use, right? From,
Only to duplexes.
that's a change in use. So that would require a new line, you'd have to satisfy all those.
Okay.
So I think the two big questions, I think that two big questions are within the code. One is this parking issue, and I think you want to have more discussion. I went to Land the other day. Land has land who have concerns about parking. And then I think the second big question is, is there some limitation we want on square footage beyond just the setbacks and stuff? And I think he wants to have that discussion. What do people think?
No. I think setbacks are what we're trying to, that they already allow us to not build to the side of the yard and not have correct drainage and, garden space, but we need more units. We need supply. I don't know. I just feel like there's no way to have it both ways. So we're gonna have to make some compromise on both sides. And that we're not saying no setbacks, right? A lot of communities have gone to that. We still have setbacks. But we're trying to say we need to create more units within infill development that doesn't require brand new infrastructure, but would require a meter. You add a unit. I want to be careful, Phil, because it does require some new infrastructure, but it doesn't require a giant new system. I mean, that's what's bankrupting most of cities across the country, right? An annexation versus let's do it more efficiently where we have the big infrastructure and now we need to build in a few more meters, which is very doable. City Homeowners has built 400 units, all infill. We've always had to meet brand new building code. There's no way of getting around that. And often it makes you build it much more up to code than it originally was. You can't put gravel driveways back in. You have to pour concrete. There's so many examples, which I'm not
You don't want to
against.
get me started on that.
And do you have something that we need to talk about tonight too?
But Rebecca, with the thing that you're describing, but again, it has to be taken in conjunction with the fact that we've eliminated parking minimums.
Did you have something to?
I keep thinking about what Phil said, like builders are not gonna build something that no one can park at. And I really have thought about that a lot because I thought, I don't need as much parking because I serve people that don't have 5 cars, just don't. And this guy over here wants us to get rid of all of our cars, which I think is a good thing too, right?
Sound like a raging radical here. Maybe.
Which he is,
So-
and I'm in agreement with them that that's a good incentive, but the reality is someone isn't gonna build with no parking space in a.
But are they gonna convert?
Excuse me? Do you know how often it has happened?
Oriad is its own, and I think.
Well, but Orient's gonna be under the same.
I don't think I think you could have standards for Oriad. I don't think Oriad needs to inform how we do the zoning for the whole city because it is unique.
Okay, this is what's interesting about Orient. The city decided we needed more densification. We needed to have places for the kids who were going to college to live. And the idea was this was going to be the dormitory area. And people would buy the houses and tear them down and build up dormitories. Well, no, because every house was owned by somebody else. But Orient is an example of what's going to happen if you just say you can have densification and you don't have to require parking. I mean, when Orient started, the parking standards were less than one space for 2 bedrooms, or were 1 space for 2 bedrooms. So I'm just saying that history of what happened is a good record of what happens when you take a neighborhood, because Orient is not.
Next to a college, Marcy.
No, Orient was not, Orient was not different from Old West Lawrence, except for the zoning.
Well, there's lots of different variations. I mean, you know, land, it was brought out, neighborhoods next to the university or within 200 feet of the boundary of the university have parking requirements. No other neighborhoods have parking
And I
requirements.
would
Sorry,
agree with
those-
that, Marcy.
I mean, the other one, you know, Courtney's pushing for a long time is, you know, parking permit system, where each house gets a, you know, parking permit and then there's something like this. I mean, there's ways to solve the parking. And that's the discussion we're having. I mean, I hear both of those. I mean,
No, I mean, that's good. I'm just
I mean,
saying this is.
do you think there should be parking requirement everywhere, or are you more concerned about the ones around the university?
It's not, well, it's university and it's Lawrence High School. I mean, if you want to talk about parking.
This was the conversation I had
But
later.
next, I'm gonna actually move then from parking to trash.
Yeah.
Because once you get densification, then you have a lot more trash, you have a lot more carts on the alley. You have to somehow control that. And if I missed it in the discussion on section 9 of the development code, I want to get back to, we need to have a development code that requires trash collection from properties, which we do not have in Orient right now. There's no requirement.
Sanitation code?
What?
Sanitation code?
No, we accept, there's an exception for alleys or trash. If it's served by dumpsters, they say you don't have to have any requirements. So all of a sudden, you know, at one time people said, okay, we have to deal with the trash, so we're going to take these. But now what's happening is you can have a neighbor, and we do, who said, I don't want to have this dumpster on my property because then I can get one more parking space. And then you just don't have a dumpster.
Well, if you have parking, you don't have to worry about that. You can take the sanitation.
Okay, so I want to sum up just at a really high level. What I'm hearing is a concern about the cascading effects of increasing density. Not all of which are in this code, but this code doesn't live a separate life from the life of the city. And so if the city grows and changes like this, how do we make sense of all of those changes that have to be made? And how do we know that the city is following the bigger picture? Am I catching that all pretty correctly? Okay, okay.
And I think, you know, again, I think this balance is, you know, back to Rebecca's point and your point, you know, if someone's gonna build a brand new subdivision west of K10, you know, if they want to make it dense, they want to have neighborhood coffee shops and all that, we want a code that says they have to have a parking space in that new development. I think the answer, most people say no. I think what you're saying is, in some of our established neighborhoods, we should have a parking requirement. I'm open to that. I think we can separate those two positions out. Is that what you're suggesting?
I like that notion
Yeah.
of making a distinction between infill densification and greenfield densification with respect to parking. I mean, I think it's a logical notion.
And I think it depends, not just infill, I'm talking even more closely aligned to either university or otherwise.
Yeah, those neighborhoods where we know.
I mean, like my neighborhood,
Already.
everyone has, I mean, in my neighborhood, there's not a single car that parks on the street because everyone has, you know, 2-car garages with a big thing. So that neighborhood, even though it's infill, if someone wants to put a duplex next to my house, okay, fine. I don't know that they have to add a whole bunch of parking, because my neighborhood, parking is not an issue.
But in Pinckney, for example, short blocks, east-west.
Michael wants to,
Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry.
okay, see what you're talking about, that's the issue.
I caught it.
Okay, Michael, you have a few minutes,
Okay, well, you bear with me. We have very little time left.
yeah, we have more meetings, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's similar to Phil. Yeah, I mean, I think I probably write better than I talk. But I've actually been focused on some of this changes in infrastructure, really, but in the dynamics of the urban setting or the interface, as I call it, of densification, land use, and transportation circulation. And in the context of this code, we're talking about, like Rebecca said, getting rid of cars, at least downplaying the importance of single occupancy motor vehicles. With greater densification, if we pull this code off successfully, we will achieve what we're referring to as, you know, mixed use, 15-minute walkable neighborhoods, so that not only is it denser, but the range of uses, the small scale neighborhood size commercial uses, like I mentioned earlier, are incorporated in all mixed developments so that people don't have to have a car. We can rely on multimodal transportation, transit, bicycling, walking more so than a single occupancy motor vehicle, which then of course has implication of reducing the number of automobiles, reducing the number of parking spaces needed. That all, of course, will play out in the new greenfield developments. Existing developments, it's a different animal, as we know. In that context, I would say it's important that we have by right accessory commercial units as well as home occupations, so that we can in effect return to a century ago or so, when all of our neighborhoods did have small little groceries and shoe repair or whatever in each neighborhood. That's part of what our goal is. But the dynamic that I've been working on for several years, and you know, it's that interface of the land use and vehicle use, and you know, motor vehicle or multimodal transportation. Plan 2040 and Transportation 2040 both say that transportation is inextricably linked to land use. It's in the plan. It's also eliminating or reducing actually single occupancy motor vehicles as part of the strategic plan. It's all there. Hopefully this code is a way that we can fulfill those goals. I met, and Jeff, you may remember in 2018, with Sandy Day, Amanda Saheen, you, and several neighborhood representatives from 4 or 5 neighborhoods about the subdivision regulations and trying to get some of this incorporated. I don't know if you remember that. It was in the bank at Hobbs Taylor Loft.
Thank you.
You do, yeah. And so this is something I've been mulling over and working with LAN for some time. Basically, I think chapter 11 in this code was chapter 8 in the previous code, subdivision regulations, is where we should be addressing some of these requirements for bikeways and better sidewalks design standards. I listed it and I sent everybody a letter. It's on, I think, page 134 of module 2, with a whole lot of proposals, 8 pages of proposals. One of which is how we can facilitate more bikeways that will enable 15-minute walkable neighborhoods as well as sidewalks. And there's a big disparity right now in the code between the subdivision regulations for bikeways and the subdivision regulations for sidewalks. Sidewalks is covered extensively, not only in chapter 8, also in chapter 16 of the current code, mentioned and discussed in detail dozens of times. The word bicycle appears in the code in the subdivision regulations twice. It's not addressed at all, really. It's really kind of an after the fact that bicyclists will just bicycle on the street and you fend for yourself. You put yourself, in harm's way if you want to. I think that needs to be addressed. That needs to be changed. We need to have not, the specifications, the goals of how many bikeways per year, but that it's a value, it's important in the code because it is copacetic with density. Both will make each other happen. So given that, like I said earlier, I think we need to eliminate R1 low density. That is not going to enable a 15-minute walkable neighborhood. We're not going to have the commercial mix in there. It's going to be too dispersed. Infrastructure in any regard will cost more. It's going to be counterproductive. And I mean, Phil Struble said that infrastructure is the biggest cost of development. So I assume he knows what he's talking about. But one of the things that I'd like to see in this code and the subdivision regulations is design standards, not the specifications, although I'd like to see that, but standards for narrower pavement. Narrower pavement not only is traffic calming, but it actually makes residential streets become bikeways without extra cost to generate a separate bikeway. We will, however, need physically separated bikeways on arterials and collectors for safety, for, again, cost of ownership. We can, and MSO right now is narrowing motor vehicle lanes right now on any number of projects and in their standards, in their design standards on arterials and collectors. So, it has happened. We don't want this code to come into effect and actually be out of step with the way things are right now progressing. We should incorporate it here specifically. If we have narrower pavement and narrower right-of-way, it makes more of the dense land that we're working with, it's particularly in new development, available for private development. So it's more cost effective, not only for the developers to have more land available, to have less cost by special assessment to build the streets and the sidewalks. But it allows more of that land, that valuable land that, we're trying to allocate available for private development and profit. Right now, 78% of streets have sidewalks. 8% of streets have bikeways. That's not counting the white stripe. I don't consider, and many multimodal advocates don't consider white stripe bike lanes either safe or usable. It's an application that very few bicyclists, 5%, 8% maybe, make use of. It's, you know, it's not worth the investment to build that kind of a bikeway. So on arterials and collectors, they need to be separated. And that's called all ages and ability bikeways, that kids going to school, families going to the park, the library, they will use them and feel safe and make use of them. So then that's it in a nutshell. I have a whole lot more that I could go over, but really it has to do with achieving 15-minute walkable neighborhoods through the transportation interface with more dense land use. So, you know, that's all I need to say. We're running out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time. A couple things. One, a lot of those have to do with subdivision regulations. And I think we talked about, we're not touching those at this point, right? Elizabeth?
Right.
Well, they're mentioned as some required internal to a neighborhood, which that wording doesn't work for me.
Okay.
I'm thinking it's important for separation of bikeways on arterials and collectors. Internally, and I'm not sure what Elizabeth meant by internal, but to me, internally means the residential streets, the network of streets. And that can be achieved simply by narrower pavement. I've used the number 20 feet with parking on one side, 26 feet with parking on both sides. We can play with the numbers. MSO would have an idea of how that would work, but that's what I mean by how it could be a design standard without the specifications in the subdivision regulations.
We do definitely think we want to take that up, and Nick and I have talked about that in our design standard, so that's useful to talk about. Let me ask two questions. I know are definitely in this code. One, R2 zoning, does it have any commercial uses? I think the question is, you don't think it does?
But it does have up to duplexes in it.
Yeah, but not
Doesn't have-
commercial. Is that what you're suggesting? You want
Yeah.
some commercial use in R2 district?
Yeah, if we want all our neighborhoods to be 15-minute mixed-use walkable neighborhoods, we have to have a commercial mix in there.
So do we-
But how do we?
I'm not sure that a 15-minute walkable neighborhood is the city's standard. That's not what Plan 2040 says. So is that city policy that we're shooting for? It hasn't been what we're shooting for.
I'm just referring to how you have put it somewhere in about a 15-minute neighborhood. I'm calling it 15
Yeah,
minute
no, I really
walkable.
appreciate that it is a standard and some communities have adopted it, but I don't think that's what every neighborhood in Lawrence is going to be. That's a big difference from what we've drafted. So we have recognized that there will still be development that's predominantly residential that may not get any commercial in it. And if we want to move to more mixed use, like everywhere, I think, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's beyond where Plan 2040 is right now.
Well, I'm working with how we want design standards in the code, referencing how you referred to somewhere in the code, the new code, about walkable neighborhoods. You said 15-minute neighborhoods.
Not in the code.
Well, it was at 2 or 3 meetings ago. I can't remember. I can't pull it up, but.
Yeah, so, and I realize like I'm stuck on semantics, but that's a different design pattern than I think Plan 2040 calls for. So that's why I'm asking if that is the consensus in the city, that's what we're shooting for.
Well, put it this way, that's what I'm shooting for.
That's important. I
If we're trying to
appreciate that you
achieve density,
have a lot of ideas, but we're implementing the whole city's plan.
right,
And so, and I think what there are bits and pieces that we want to pick up and take and move in, absolutely. But I think that as a group, before we, go in and add commercial everywhere, that is a different course than the code draft has taken thus far. So it's not the direction we were going, and
I just think of it as one of our better strategies, put it that way, that to achieve density, that if it's not a walkable neighborhood, we're going to still end up with a whole lot of motor vehicles, which is going to prevent density. I think all these pieces have to work together to reach that goal, one of which is walkability. And I don't mean walkability by having a smooth sidewalk. I mean, within reach, within 15 minutes, so people don't have to use a car. I think that's a strategy that we should be.
I agree with you. It's an excellent strategy. It's an excellent goal. I don't think it's the city's adopted goal right now. And
Well, I'm
that's-
wanting it to become that. That's what I think I'm working on in this process, so that when it's discussed, it will be a question. Is this of value? Do we think this will work? Do we say it's superfluous? I think we should be asking that question. That's basically where I'm at.
Comments on that? Other folks want to weigh in?
But there's one question that I would look at is, what is the size of commercial development right now and what makes it affordable economically? Because years ago, we tried to have a neighborhood grocery store in East Lawrence and it failed. And they were buying things from Checkers and taking it to the store and it helped people who couldn't walk, but the prices ended up being higher.
Right.
And so anybody who had a car didn't go. So there's some problem. Can I have 1 minute for Board of Zoning Appeals since it's on the,
Yep, and then we'll get to the last slide in a second.
okay, so we're saying in review and decision, the Board of Zoning Appeals shall prepare written findings of fact. They don't prepare written findings of fact. The staff prepares them and they review them. So I'm just saying, we don't really have members of the Board of Zoning Appeals who have a secretary, even though it's in their bylaws, and do that. So we ought to pay attention to that. And then I think there's a few places where, they talk about findings of fact, supported by substantial evidence in the record of proceedings. So you can't really have all the findings until you've had the hearing. Then somehow it has to get written up. And it says decisions on variance become effective on the date the Board of Zoning Appeals makes its decision. And then you say you have 30 days to appeal. So all those things have to kind of fit in a timeline, and we can talk about that further. That's all.
I got it.
Okay.
It's fast. Thank you.
Okay, update on the,
Okay, so this is what we're looking at in terms of drafting. So next week, we will have module 3 rolled into the full draft, which already has modules 1 and 2 together. It's not the final version. Not the final version, but it is the whole thing. For anyone out there who was waiting, who didn't believe we'd get to a whole thing, we got to a whole thing. It's going up. So then across the month of May, we'll do an update to the Planning Commission on the 8th. We meet again on the 16th. And what I'm hoping for is when we repost, if you guys want to get in and add comments to module 3, if you want to back up and add them to module 1 and add them to module 2, we've started putting together a list of consolidated edits. So like Nick's been really diligent about commenting. So the version I'm working from will have everyone's comments in it. And if there's some place where I can't reconcile what the group is saying by the meeting on the 16th, I will have sent out an email or a memo and say, okay, these are the things we've got to decide on as a group, or punt until post-adoption. We are hoping that if we live in the office and type 24/7 by May 28th, we'll have a revised draft. It's going to happen. Because at the moment we're shooting for a May 29th Planning Commission informal sort of, is that what the thought process is? So invite the public in, overview what's going on, and then give it about a month in there for additional public comment. We will be doing a series of outreach meetings also, but this is just the draft itself. And then we are scheduled for June 26th, Planning Commission review and potentially recommendation. And then I learned that in Lawrence, we can think backwards in time or forwards in time because you schedule Wednesday, then Monday. I like it.
yes.
It's impressive the way you guys move through time. So,
And we also have a June 20th steering committee meeting.
oh, I forgot that. So sorry. Yes, we have a June 20th steering committee meeting.
Yep.
Okay.
About when do you think that outreach to neighborhoods would be?
So we need to pull together some opportunities and then we'll send out an invite to neighborhoods and they can pick a time that they want to talk to us. I haven't had a chance to get back and get that set up
So
yet.
that's a good point, real quick on that. Yeah, 1 second. Let me finish that comment, then you can say something. That, yeah, what Michael's referring to is we're gonna have time set up on nights, weekends, and during the day for neighborhoods who want to come and have specific questions about their neighborhood. You know, University Place or whatever the neighborhood is, come and have specific questions about their neighborhood and how the code might affect their particular neighborhood and make their comments on neighborhood. And we'll have that sign up thing. So that's what he was referring to. Yes.
Oh, I apologize. We were misled into, we've been into the meeting last week, we've been to this meeting, that you were interested, but we're not a crowd of people, but we're very interested in everything that you're discussing. And we were led to believe that you would at least listen to a couple of our comments as you proceed in your procedure. But what I'm understanding you to say is it's not, there's no value in us being here from now until you have invite your neighborhoods.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but there are certainly ways to make the comments in lots of different ways. We've had lots of different comments.
Right.
At some meetings where we've had time, we've had people make comments at the meetings. And so obviously we're going farther than we thought. But yes, we're happy to hear your comments, happy to have you meet one-on-one, happy for you to submit written comments, all of the above.
I just wanted to make that clear, because we are very, very, very invested in all of this, and I feel that whatever we have to say somewhat will be dismissed.
When are the neighborhood ones gonna go down? Just, I know you talked about, when are you gonna start the neighborhood?
I think we're gonna try to get this going like in the next week or two.
Okay.
That would be plenty of time to, everybody's saying the same thing, but plenty of time for us to interject how we really feel. And because all of the stuff we're talking about, inclusion and in existing neighborhoods or not, we all have very strong opinions on it. And I come from a neighborhood that's, 300 or 400 folks, and they have a lot of real strong opinions. And so they wanted me to kind of get that word out. But I agree with, when do we do that?
Well, we've certainly had, some of those opportunities. We'll have plenty of more as we get through that. But yes, the idea when I went to land last week was people wanted not an open comment where everyone, they wanted their specific neighborhoods, because each neighborhood might have specific concerns that are different than other specific concerns. So our approach on that was to give each neighborhood their own time, their own segment, and give their own comments out.
I really appreciate it.
Yes.
From our perspective, we didn't get that.
Yeah.
So, I appreciate it.
It's kind of a recent development.
The reason, it arose after land last week. I was at land last week.
Right.
And that was the request that the neighborhoods, because University Place has different concerns than Pinckney, which have different concerns than Albemarle.
Believe on inclusion, and that's the right thing to do in especially Greenfield. In the walkability and the things we're talking about, that all makes a lot of sense. But in established neighborhoods, there's a whole different set of dynamics that has to be addressed. And I
Each neighborhood-
know for one, I've got a whole list of them, so.
Brandon, it feels like the horse is out of the barn here. We're listening to very intelligent comments about a lot of stuff. It seems like these things are fait accompli, that these codes are going to happen, that these issues of triplexes and whether or not our infrastructure can support it are just going to happen. Is that the case? I mean, is this a done deal? Because I kind of felt like, gosh, we better get to this meeting because there's so much that's already happened that we're already way behind an 8 ball that we shouldn't be.
Without a voice.
Yeah.
And so where are we in the 8 ball scene here?
Well, I think there's a couple answers to that. One is that Plan 2040, we spent a lot of time creating Plan 2040. Then we hired the consultant to implement Plan 2040. And Plan 2040 does say we want more density, a lot of the things you heard today, right? We want more density, we want more affordable housing. And so-
We would be on the 2040 thing. I don't mean to go back.
Yeah.
Very briefly, what's we at the 2040 plan? Who was we?
We, the city, the county, the community, it was like a 1.5 year long process that we adopted 2 years ago. And so that step one was the plan. Step two is the code to the zoning code. And then step three is the building codes, the sanitary codes, the design standards. So it's kind of a 3-part process to get to what we want the plan to be, zoning code, and then even the more detailed codes. So is the question of, do we want the city to be denser? I mean, if that's your question, if that's been decided, I would say probably. I mean, could the city commission change that? Yes. So but the direction given to the consultant is take this code and implement it. And so the question
It
then
sounds like it
becomes,
makes such sense, but when you talk about it, in reality, it kind of doesn't. And so if there's no room for discussion about density or not, then I'm gonna shut up. But,
well, I think the question is, I think there's definitely a question for density and how it looks in particular neighborhoods,
right,
as opposed to density in general. And where we draw that line is the question.
And the times we're gonna be able to comment on that, to your earlier point, will that be sufficient to alter any course that's already been kind of decided on?
Well,
Exactly.
So this is the steering committee, right? And then it has to go through a planning commission. There's 10 members of the planning commission, one of which is on this committee who's not here today. Jane happens to be on the planning commission. She's here today, but sitting along the wall. So I can't tell you what they're thinking, that 5 of them, and then it has to come to the city commission. I'm on the city commission, obviously. There's 4 other city commissioners, 3 of them would have to agree to it. So I would say there's a lot of process between here and there and getting to what people agree on.
So we'll have at least a voice in that process before decisions are being made.
Yes, so that's what the consultants put on the planning commission agenda, then it goes to the planning commission, then goes to the city commission. So there's the 3 parts to influence that, 3 ways to influence it. Through the consultant, through the planning commission, through the city commission.
Well, good, because I know a
not
number of us have
committee,
been.
right? I mean, this seems like the place that we shouldn't necessarily be.
No, I think it's a good place to be. I mean, I think we're hearing that, and that's what we're hearing. I mean, Phil's bringing up
But Phil's
comments
he's got a
too.
name tag, so he belongs.
Yeah.
I don't have.
Right, yeah.
I'm a little offended that I don't have it. But I don't. So,
Yeah, no, but yeah, I mean, this is not a public meeting in the sense where everyone gets 3 minutes to speak.
Yeah, I think.
I've misunderstood.
Yeah, because I know a number of us came from other homeowners associations and we're representing folks.
I see.
And so I'm sitting here thinking, well, when should I vote?
Yeah.
The answer is the neighborhood meetings, right?
That's
That's the answer.
There's actually another really good opportunity, and that is to go to the project website and read through the document and comment on things that you think you either like, don't like, or want to change. There's been a lot of comments that have been collected over the year. It feels like forever.
It's been
Well,
a year and.
Yeah.
Our group has submitted several documents,
Okay.
so,
All right.
but you've answered our question. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you for what you do.
Yeah.
that's good. Okay, almost out of time. Jane, real quick? Out of time, actually, 50 minutes.
For everybody's sake,
No matter what the top.
Draft of the code before it goes to the planning commission, when will that be online and available? Is that just the day before the open house?
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna be able to get it done much faster than that because of the editing that we need to do, which is why it's staying open for another month before it actually goes into hearing.
Before, okay, but whatever the open house is, really, people won't have had enough time
Well,
to read the whole code.
So, yeah, so I'm sorry, stumbling over my words. The edits between now and the version on the 29th, I don't think are going to be super substantial. Because at least coming out of steering committee, they've talked about it and talked about it. So, I think the version of the whole version that goes up early next week is a good place for people to start commenting. And when we put up the next version, because we're encouraging people to get into this version, we will do it in track changes to make it easier to see what changed between the May version and the June version.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Okay, thank you, everyone.